Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. Two little girls stood on a wooden platform in the center of a freezing Montana barn, barefoot, in November. They were 6 years old, identical twins, wearing thin cotton dresses that had no business being worn in any season, let alone the bitter heart of a Montana winter. Their small feet were flat against frozen wood planks. Their arms were bruised. Their lips had gone the pale, bloodless color that lips turn when a body has been cold for too long. They were holding each other's hands so tightly that their small knuckles had gone completely white. And they were not crying. That was the thing that would stay with Jack Thompson for the rest of his life. Not the bruises, not the bare feet. It was the silence. The absolute, heartbreaking silence of two children who had learned somewhere along the way that crying did not help. So they had simply stopped. They stood there, eyes fixed on the ground, still as two small stones in a river, while a room full of grown adults refused to meet their gaze. Every person in that barn was looking at the floor, every single one of them, except Jack and Rex. Jack Thompson had not come to that barn to save anyone. He was 60 years old, a retired United States Army veteran with a bad left knee, a modest pension, and a weathered cabin outside the small town of Callaway Creek, Montana. He had come to deliver scrap metal to a man named Pruitt, who paid cash, no questions asked. He needed the money for property taxes and Rex's joint medication. He had left his cabin before dawn with 300 pounds of metal in the truck bed and absolutely no intention of being anyone's hero. Rex was 11 years old, a retired military bomb detection German shepherd with a muzzle gone almost entirely gray and a left hip that bothered him in the cold. He had been Jack's partner in the Army for 6 years. 6 years of heat and dust and the kind of trust that only forms between two living creatures who have kept each other alive. When they both retired, they came home together. Rex slept on Margaret's side of the bed. Jack had never told him not to. Some things you simply allow because the alternative is too quiet to bear. When Rex stepped into that barn and stopped walking, Jack stopped too. Rex's ears had gone fully forward. His breathing had slowed to something deliberate and measured. His eyes were locked on those two little girls. The sound that came from low in his throat was not a growl. It was something older and sadder than a growl. It was the sound of an animal who understands injustice the same way good men do, not through reasoning, but through something that lives deeper and has no name. Jack put his hand on Rex's back. Rex kept his eyes on the girls. The man running the auction stood to the side with a clipboard and the practiced, casual voice of someone who had done this before. He called it a private guardianship transfer. He used words designed to make the thing sound administrative, unremarkable, the kind of words that give people permission to look at the floor. The bidding began. Jack had never heard a sound as obscene as a number being put on two children's lives. The opening figure was already low enough to make the back of his neck go hot. Then it dropped lower, and lower still. The people in that barn shifted their weight and cleared their throats and studied the ground beneath their boots. The number kept dropping. Nobody moved. Jack's jaw tightened. His hands closed into fists at his sides. He thought about Margaret, his wife of 31 years, gone 4 years now. He thought about how she had always wanted children and how life had not given them that. He thought about the soldiers he had buried and the promises you make to the living and the dead about what kind of man you were going to keep being. He thought about walking out. He almost did, and then Rex moved. Slowly, deliberately, without a sound, Rex walked forward and placed himself directly between those two little girls and the crowd. He stood there, still as a statue, his whole body communicating one single message with absolute clarity. Not these two. Not today. Not while I am standing here. Then he looked back at Jack, just once, the way he had looked back at him 100 times in the field, steady, certain, telling his partner exactly which direction the mission was pointing. Jack exhaled slowly. Then he raised his hand. "Hold on," he said. His voice was quiet. The entire barn went still. Jack walked forward until he stood beside Rex. He looked at the auctioneer. He looked at the stepmother, who met his gaze with cold, flat eyes. Then he looked at the two little girls. Hope looked up at him for just a moment. Her eyes were dark and careful and ancient in a way that no 6-year-old's eyes should ever be. "I don't have much," Jack said. His voice did not shake. "I've got a pension, a cabin with a wood stove, and I've got honor, which is more than I can say for everyone in this room right now." The silence that followed was the heaviest silence Jack had ever stood inside. From somewhere near the back of the barn, in the shadows where the light did not reach, a woman quietly covered the remainder of the required payment without a word. She did not step forward. She did not identify herself. She simply ensured the number was met and stepped back into the dark. Jack would not learn her name until much later. What he knew right then was that two little girls were stepping down from that platform. Rex was walking beside them, and the barn door was opening, and the cold Montana air was hitting all of them at once. And nobody stopped them. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Grace sat in the middle of the front seat and talked the entire way. Not about anything that made sense, just a constant soft stream of words that Jack would come to understand was how she kept silence from becoming dangerous. Hope sat against the passenger door with her hand buried in Rex's fur. She did not let go once during the entire drive. Jack kept his eyes on the road. He thought, Margaret would know what to do. I only know how to follow orders. And Margaret was always the one giving the right ones. But Margaret was gone, and these two little girls were in his truck, and Rex had already made his position on the matter perfectly clear. So Jack drove home. The cabin was small and warm and smelled like pine wood and coffee and the quiet of a life lived alone. Jack got the wood stove burning higher. He made soup, only canned soup, nothing special, but he heated it properly and served it in the good ceramic bowls he and Margaret had bought at a craft fair in Missoula 20 years ago. He did not know why he used the good bowls. He just did. Grace ate everything and kept talking. Hope ate slowly, watching Jack's hands every time he moved. He noticed that immediately and understood it without needing it explained. She was watching his hands to make sure they were not raised in anger. She was counting exits. Jack had seen soldiers do the same thing after too many months in the wrong places. She was 6 years old. Rex lay across the doorway of the small room where the girls slept that night. Nobody asked him to. He simply did it, the way he had always done the things that needed doing, without ceremony and without hesitation. Jack sat at the kitchen table long after the girls had fallen asleep. His coffee had gone cold. The wood stove ticked in the corner. He sat with the weight of the day and the sound of two small children breathing in the next room, and the knowledge that tomorrow he needed to make some calls. A social worker named Linda Marsh, an old county judge named Harold Briggs, and legal aid office in Billings that handled cases the system preferred to forget. He would do this right. He would not stop until those girls were somewhere permanent and safe and loved. Rex came and sat beside him and put his heavy gray head on his knee. Jack put his hand on Rex's head. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." The weeks that followed moved slowly, the way important things always do. Hope did not speak for 4 full days. She watched everything with careful eyes and followed Rex from room to room like a shadow. On the 5th morning, Jack found her in the corner of the living room with an old anatomy book open across her knees, studying it with quiet, complete absorption. He put a cup of warm cocoa on the floor beside her and walked back to the kitchen without a word. That afternoon, she came to him and asked very quietly if she could put a warm cloth on Rex's hip. She had read about joint inflammation. She wanted to help. Jack looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I think he'd like that very much." Rex offered his paw without being asked, like a patient who had been waiting for exactly this appointment. Hope wrapped the warm cloth around his hip with hands that were careful and precise and heartbreakingly gentle. She did this every single morning from that day forward without being reminded once. Grace found her voice at school during the 3rd week. A boy in her class was being mocked at lunch, quietly, cruelly. Grace set down her tray, walked across the cafeteria, and stood beside him. She did not shout. She simply said in a calm and level voice that carried across the entire room, "He is not alone, and neither are you." The cafeteria went silent. The principal called Jack that afternoon. Jack sat in his truck in the school parking lot for 10 full minutes after he hung up. He had stood beside some of the finest people this country ever produced. He had witnessed acts of courage that earned medals and formal recognition. He had never seen anything braver than what Grace did in that cafeteria. One morning, Jack came downstairs before dawn and found a folded piece of notebook paper on the kitchen table. Hope's handwriting, small and careful and slightly uneven the way a 6-year-old's handwriting is when she is trying very hard to get every word exactly right. He made his coffee before he opened it. She wrote about Rex first. She wrote that Rex had never once startled her awake, that every time he came close, he made some small sound first, so she always knew he was there before she felt him. She wrote that she thought Rex must have been a person in another life, because no animal is that careful with someone else's fear. Then she wrote about Jack. She wrote that she knew he was sad sometimes. She could tell because he got very quiet and looked at the mountains the way she used to look at the door of whatever room they locked her in, like he was waiting for something that was not coming back. She wrote that she hoped he knew that whatever he was waiting for, she thought it had already come back. She thought it came back the day he raised his hand in that barn. She did not use the word father. She used the word safe. She wrote, "You are the first place I have ever felt safe, and safe is bigger than any word I know." Jack set the letter down. He sat very still for a long time. The wood stove breathed in the corner. Rex came and put his head on Jack's knee the way he always did when Jack went somewhere inside himself that Rex could not follow but refused to leave him alone in. And Jack Thompson, a man who had served 3 tours, who had carried fallen brothers, who had stood at Margaret's grave without making a sound, put his face in his hands and wept. Not from sadness exactly, from the particular release of a man who has been carrying too much for too long and has finally been given permission to set it down. Rex stayed beside him until it passed. That is what loyal creatures do. Jack worked quietly and methodically over the following weeks. He called Linda Marsh on Monday, Judge Harold Briggs on Tuesday. He drove to Billings on Thursday to sit with a legal aid attorney named Carol Simmons, who fought cases nobody else wanted to touch. He testified in court on a gray December morning in his best flannel shirt, the one Margaret always said made him look distinguished. He told the truth in plain, steady words. No drama, no editorializing, just what he had seen, what he knew, and what those girls deserved. The stepmother faced consequences. A family was found. Robert and Ann Callahan from a town 40 miles north, quiet, warm, genuine in the way that cannot be manufactured. Jack drove up to meet them on a Saturday and sat at their kitchen table for 3 hours, asking careful questions. He watched how they listened. He watched their eyes. He drove home and called Linda Marsh. "They're the ones," he said. The morning the girls left, Jack made breakfast on the good plates. Grace ate everything and talked the whole time, her words warm and bright and tumbling over each other. Hope ate slowly and watched Jack's face. When the Callahan's car pulled up the drive, Rex stood at the window and watched it come. Grace hugged Rex first. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur and held on with everything she had. Rex went completely still. He did not pull away. He simply received her love with the full dignity of an animal who has earned the right to be loved like that. The driver turned off the engine and waited. Hope was last. She stood in front of Jack in the doorway. The cold air came in around them both. She looked up at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and straightened the collar of his flannel shirt with her small fingers, slowly, carefully, making sure it was right. Jack could not speak. He crouched down to her level, his bad knee complaining and ignored completely. He looked at her directly. "You are not what happened to you," he said quietly. "You are what you do next. And I have seen what you do next, and it is going to be something." Hope looked at him one more moment. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. Jack held on too. When the car pulled away down the long drive, Jack stood on the porch. Rex pressed his whole warm weight against Jack's leg the way he had for 11 years, in the desert and in the mountains, and in the quiet of a life lived after war. They watched until the car disappeared around the bend, and the snow closed behind it like a curtain. Jack reached down and put his hand on Rex's head, and they stood there together, in the silence. Two old soldiers, both of them still standing. That evening, Jack reached under his bed for the small wooden box where he kept his army medals. He opened it. He took Hope's letter from his shirt pocket, folded it carefully along its original creases, and placed it inside, right on top. Because some things you earn in war, and some things you earn in life. And the things you earn in life, the quiet things, the things no ceremony marks, the things that cost everything and give back even more, those are the ones you keep closest. He closed the box. Rex settled across his feet. Outside the window, the snow fell the way it always does in Montana, quietly, without asking permission, covering everything in something clean and still. Your purpose does not expire when your best years feel behind you. Your courage does not retire when the uniform comes off. The most important moment of your life may not have happened yet. It may be waiting for you in the most unexpected place, in a broken barn on a frozen morning when you came for something else entirely and found something that needed you more than anything else ever had. Jack Thompson did not save those girls because he was ready. He was tired and grieving and full of doubt, and he almost walked out that door. He saved them because he showed up anyway, because Rex reminded him which direction the mission was pointing, and because somewhere inside him, underneath all the loss and the quiet, the man Margaret had always believed in was still standing. He just needed 2 little girls and 1 gray-muzzled dog to remind him of that. If you believe that loyalty still matters, if you believe that one person showing up at the right moment can change everything, if you believe that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway, then you belong here with us at Jack and Rex Tales. Subscribe, because every story we tell is a reminder that the best of us is not behind us. It is waiting to be called forward.